So we'll go through, we'll get intros from everyone, and then they'll also tell you something that's in the program we're seeing.
My recommendation would be Atlantics, if you could get to that. I feel like it's one of the movies that is so singular. It's unlike anything else I've seen this year, and it's just so lovely. You think it's going in one direction, and then halfway through the movie changes completely. It's such beautiful performances. It's a Senegalese film, so we don't get a lot of cinema from out there, and it's just so beautiful, so gorgeous to look at, and the story is amazing. So highly recommend it if you can get out to that one.
Hi everyone. Well, having fun yet? My name is Rhoades. I'm the film critic for Miami Art Scene and Contract Movies in Miami. I'm going to go to bat for a small film that had a release in Miami a few months ago and is showing tomorrow. It's a film, it's a feature debut of Argentinian director Lucio Castro. It's called End of the Century. And it's kind of like, what I like about it is that it does a very playful spin on that subgenre of the romance that blossomed by chance. So think Richard Platters, Before Trinity, or Andrew Hayes' Weekend. This is like a gay spin on that genre. And it mixes in also, it reminded me a lot of some of the work of the East Asian filmmakers like also Xiaoxian and Tsai Ming-Ling, the Taiwanese filmmaker. But it's really accessible, and it takes a really interesting turn at the halfway point, and it's better you just don't know anything going in, because it brings a lot of surprises. It's tomorrow 8:45, and I also want to take the opportunity to thank Key West Film Festival for including such a strong lineup of queer cinema this year.
Hi, I am Tomris Laffly. I write for TimeOut New York, Variety, and RogerReport.com. The one movie that I want to recommend, I mean, I echo your sentiments. You should definitely randomly pick and see everything, but my favorite movie from this year's lineup and from this year is Marriage Story. I know people talk about this movie as a divorce drama, and I don't necessarily think that's the sexiest sell, and it's not necessarily that accurate. It's really a very closely studied, a very elegant examination of a marriage, of a relationship. It's very mature, very empathetic. You will see a lot of echoes of your own self and your relationship. It's featuring two stellar performances from Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson. I just loved it, and it's also very funny, which is something that people don't expect about Marriage Story. So I heartily recommend it.
Hello, I'm Jen Yamato. I write for the LA Times. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for everyone who brought us in. Gosh, it's hard to recommend films that have already screened, but I will. I just introduced the Farewell. We had a Q&A with Lulu Wang, the director and writer, whose true life story is stranger than fiction. She turned it into a podcast episode of This American Life. She then turned it into a film that's one of the most moving and I think in a surprising way maybe most relatable films that I've seen this year. It's called The Farewell. And then tonight I'm introducing, is it Just Mercy tonight? Yes, so that's another one that has elements of, wow, I cheated, I like squeezed in two films. Okay. Just Mercy is adapted from the memoir by Brian Stevenson, who is a civil rights attorney, and it stars Michael B. Jordan. It's about one man's fight to, fight against the death penalty and against overly punitive justice system. It's a really moving, true life story that I think is a great example of how film on a mainstream level can reach towards activism and try to affect real change. So I recommend that one.
Hello. I'm David Fear. I'm an editor and critic at Rolling Stone. I want to second Monica's recommendation for Atlantics. I think it's playing at 10:30 tonight. It's playing sometime this evening. It is a feature debut from a French Senegalese director named Madi Diop. If she's an actress and a writer, if anybody has seen Claire Denise's 35 Shots of Rum here, she is the young woman who plays the daughter. It starts off focusing on this group of construction workers in Senegal that are trying to get paid for this like crazy, monstrous skyscraper that they've helped build, and they want their back wages, and so they end up getting onto a boat to try and make it over to Spain. And then the story switches to the people that they left behind, and that's when things really start getting interesting. It's going to be on Netflix soon, but the chance to see this in a theater with a crowd on a large screen, you guys are really, really lucky that you have this opportunity, so this should not be missed.
And so I wanted to get into that a little bit and talk a bit about the season that we're in right now. And as critics, we're talking about, you know, the cultural value of these movies, their aesthetic value, what makes them worth talking about, how we deal with the kind of ever-present nature of Oscar season, or whether we choose to deal with it at all. And you'll notice there's a couple of people at these sort of big print publications on this side, because to some extent I would say you folks deal with this, the folks who have a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they write about this season, but that's not always the case. So I want to dig into this a little bit, maybe start on this side. We'll start with Cameron since he's next to me, why not? Because Vanity Fair throws the best Oscar party in town, right?
I just want to say that 10 minutes ago, Eric said I would not get the first question.
I like to keep people on their
So I just wanted to make sure the public knew that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Oscars content sort of pays my rent, and Vanity has a lot of those ties, and it's strange for me as a critic because I like the pageantry of the Oscars. I think, though, that the way that the process works just narrows the conversation down too much, particularly for independent films and foreign films. It just, other films that aren't in the Oscar conversation or that drop out of the Oscar conversation have a way of not feeling relevant anymore after a period, and that can be very frustrating if you don't necessarily trust the taste of the Academy. And I have had conversations at work about that. But on the other hand, there's something really special about a movie like Moonlight or anything smaller, anything that seems atypical for the Academy breaks through. It can be really exciting, really interesting to have for some things that you want to write about and think that they're important on their own terms. You do kind of have to find ways to find the Oscar relevance. I just wrote about a short film that's on Netflix, and I helped my case to my editor by saying, this is getting an Oscar push. It's a documentary short. It's not like an Oscar push for that is very important for that movie, but the public doesn't necessarily care about the shorts for those reasons. For that reason, so things like that, it can get really difficult to sort of speak that language.
Yeah, so my mom tells me she loves me. But I will go to her and say, there's this movie coming out, it's called Moonlight. I saw it at a festival. It is absolutely wonderful. It will just blow you away. You really need to see this. And there's usually a pause on the other end of the line, and she goes, okay, honey. And then suddenly Oscar nominations come out, and she's like, have you heard of this movie Moonlight? Should I be seeing this? And I was like, don't you read what I write? And she goes, I don't have the time, sweetie. And then Thanksgiving gets really weird. The point is that because movies like Moonlight, or even to a better extent Roma, when they start getting talked about in an Oscar conversation, it's no longer what feels like a very closed circle of film critics and cinephiles and tastemakers talking about this. It feels like it actually gets kicked up a notch so that it suddenly becomes in the public sphere. Like my mom in the suburbs suddenly knows what Roma's about, which means she's more likely to go see it if she finds out that it's playing at a multiplex or an art house cinema near her. I sort of echo Cameron's sentiment, though, is that if something is talked about in a way in which it's Oscar, 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 not only does it suck up all the oxygen in the room about everything else that's happening around this, it can unintentionally put a taint on something. I'll give you an example. If I had to pick my favorite movie of the year tomorrow, I would probably pick a film called Pain and Glory. It is a Spanish film by Pedro Almodovar, and the minute that it played at Kohn, everyone was like, this is the best thing he's done in 10, 20 years. And thank you. And it's probably going to get nominated for an Oscar. This could be his chance to win an Oscar. Is it going to get Best Foreign Language, or is it going to get Best Director? Is it going to get Best Picture? Is Antonio Banderas going to win Best Actor? And it's great that suddenly people are talking about this film outside of just people who know who Pedro Almodovar is. But there's a part of me that's scared, I guess, that if that doesn't get a slew of Oscar nominations, people are going to sort of forget that it existed in the first place, and it gets shunted aside, and suddenly this incredible movie that deserves a massive audience is just crickets.
Can you agree?
And that's what we're here for. To be honest, I forgot what the original question was.
Well, you do a lot of awards season.
Oh, awards.
So why don't we dig into that from your
Well, it's interesting that you bring up award season and how that influences or is a factor into what we write about at this time of year, because I feel like this time of year is when we all have an opportunity to bring attention to the films, the performances, the sort of underrated pieces that we hope people will see more. Like Fear writes about Pain and Glory tomorrow. I think that would help push it into a conversation, which could eventually help it be seen more. So for me right now, it's exciting because at least I feel like I'm lucky enough that I feel like if there's some filmmaker or artist that I feel very passionate about, I feel like I have the opportunity to pitch a story about that, to bring a film to a little bit more attention, maybe because of this horse race. So for me, I think it's absolutely this like weird double-edged sword in that we don't want to make art into some sort of popularity contest or competition, but I also see the opportunity in that.
Yeah, so let's hear from some folks who write for multiple publications. How do you feel about sort of the pressure to get into award season versus other ways that you might be able to tackle the new films that are coming out?
I mean, I definitely echo what you said. I think we do have an opportunity, especially this time of year, but even earlier in festivals, when we see a movie that's not necessarily kind of pre-tagged as, oh, this looks like a big Oscar movie. I think it's important for us, for those of us who are at festivals early, to see these movies early, to kind of pay attention to a performance or an overlooked title, and even in the context of Oscars. So I am one of those people who doesn't think that, oh, it's too early to talk about Oscars. I think that it's never too early. I mean, yes, I agree, we shouldn't turn this into a horse race, but also we know that it's going to happen, it's going to come, so we can play our part in broadening the conversation and not just go with what studios think that this should be an Oscar movie. Just for me personally, I always will have a slightly romantic feeling about the Oscars because I grew up in Turkey in a small town, and Oscars was really my way into the world of cinema, what it can be, and back when Oscars actually used to have a history segment about them, of honorary awards and clips. And right now all of those things are removed and they're done in Governor's Awards. But that was really my way in of the world of cinema, about how much bigger it was. So I can never completely dismiss them. But yes, over the years, for me as well, it has become frustrating. It has become this, oh, this is an Oscar movie, that's not an Oscar movie. But I still do think that it is valuable. The fact that my mom in Turkey watched Roma and then wants to have a conversation about Roma is huge for me. And it's similar like your mom. I just keep telling her, you should see this, you should see that, and then they're like, all right, we made notes, and then a year later the nominations come out and we would have that same exact conversation. Oh, Roma, okay, I'm going to watch it now. Thanks, Mom. Thanks for taking my film criticism opinion seriously.
We're all film critics to please our mothers.
Yeah. So I grew up watching the Oscars, actually with my mom, who's in the audience right now. She's trying to take photos. So I also have really fond memories of the Oscars, and I can't hate them. I do love the pageantry, but I do try, as like a rule of thumb, not to talk about the Oscars before Thanksgiving. So thanks for bringing that. But for me, as a freelancer, if I can speak to that experience, Oscars are kind of like a blessing and a curse. In one regard, I get to talk about a movie like Roma, but this year I don't have a movie like Roma. So last year I was called upon by different outlets to interview Yalitza Aparicio, the main actress in Roma, interview the producer, all these different folks. And then this year now I don't have that as a Latina reporter, and no one's calling me, to cover that story. So it's feast or famine. But on the other hand, I also get the chance to go after some of the behind the scenes folks who otherwise, if it wasn't an Oscar nomination, outlets would be like, so why are you talking to a composer? Now I get to say, well, they have an Oscar nomination, or they're getting really a lot of buzz, we should talk to them. And then that way I can, turn around and get to talk to people who help make the movie.
Hello? Okay, cool. This one's working. So I mostly write in Miami New Times, and it's about local film. And my website, Independent Ethos, is about independent film, so I don't care much about the Oscars. I've skipped watching it sometimes. I'm bothered by the politics behind it. I think that so many good films have missed out on recognition because people are deciding to award somebody that should have gotten an award 3 years ago now for something that isn't as good. So I have a lot of qualms with it, and for me it doesn't make much difference. I did grow up watching it, and I did experience some joy back in those days, but it's just not there now.
It's okay.
I don't pay a lot of attention to the Oscars in one regard, but in another regard I do. Every year, sometime in December, I do a column that is my Oscar picks, because I think it's required in the contract of being a film reviewer, you've got to do that. And the ones that I think are worthy are often different than the ones that I think will win. And that's a subtle distinction. What you were referring to is politics. Oh, so-and-so's going to get it this year because they didn't get it last year, or it's his time, or that kind of thing. So I take the Oscars with a grain of salt. I have the benefit of, I write for probably a dozen plus newspapers, and most of them I'm serving an audience that goes to CarMax and Regal Cinemas, and so I have to review a lot of those mainstream popular movies. I'm very lucky living here in Key West and also writing for the Key West Citizen, because we cover the Tropic Cinema. And the Tropic Cinema is kind of like the Angelica in New York. It has those films that we want to see. And so every week I write probably 4 movie reviews and 1 column. And of those movie reviews, at least 1 is an independent film or a film that's very deserving of attention, but it's not a mainstream blockbuster. It's not going to make $6 billion or something like that. So what I have the benefit of is nobody tells me what to review, nobody tells me what to watch. I try to attune it to my audience, because I think a large part of my job is to tell them what's coming out there, tell them enough about it that they can decide, hey, that's something I want to know about, I want to see. But every now and then, you get to really dig into something and analyze it and figure out what really makes it unique. And sometimes the Oscars give me the excuse to do that.